Well, Spain was much more formal when I was here. In fact, the word informal was a very bad word in those days. When I speak to Spanish friends today, they say, well, informal can mean bad manners, but it also, we celebrate informality in Spain today. So it's a word we can use either way. But in those days, Spain was very buttoned up. A man never went out in the street without a jacket and a tie. And I remember when I would go home from the embassy, I'd get home and I'd get into my jeans and an old torn T-shirt and start working on my car underneath the car with the oil falling on my face, and people couldn't understand how could this guy, it was very class oriented, and the middle class was very small then, and so there were rich people and poor people, and very few in the middle. So even with the economic picture difficult here, as it is in the States, it's still a more relaxed place than it was then. That was a wonderful thing. I had written my MA thesis on the Montgomery bus boycott of '56, just before entering the Foreign Service, and I had mentioned it at a cocktail party to Ambassador Woodward, who is then our ambassador. And so it was quite a surprise when one morning my phone rang and he said, the ambassador never called me. I was the youngest guy in the embassy. And he said, Michael, he said, Martin Luther King is coming to Madrid this morning. I want you to look after him and pick him up at the airport and all this kind of thing. And I called the airport, and unfortunately his plane had already landed. Rome had the Rome embassy. He had been with the Pope the day before, and the Rome embassy sent us a cable saying he was coming, but he'd already come. And I had this horrible problem. Where was he? He was in Madrid already. And so I started to call all the hotels, and I didn't even know if he was in a hotel. And I had this funny conversation with what was then called the Castellana Hilton. I think it's now the Castellana Intercontinental, right? Same place, with the guy at the desk. And I said, I'm looking for, is there possibly a Dr. King there? And he said, well, no, we don't have any medicos aquí. No hay medicos aquí, no doctors. And I said, King? He says, come on, King. What is King? I said, King is rey in English. No tenemos reyes aquí tampoco. He said, we don't have any kings here either. That was the craziest conversation. He said, but this black guy came into the hotel a little while ago. It says, sí, dice Kingo. I said, thank you very much. I slammed the phone down, and I went running across the street to the hotel, and I called from the lobby, and Dr. King, soon it was Martin and Michael. It was a wonderful thrill. It was a hero, and we were on a first-name basis. And I called to his room, and I said, I'm with the embassy, and I'm here to look after you, and the press is looking for you, and whatever you want to do, I want to make sure you can do it. He was just here for one day between Rome and Holland. And I said this whole spiel from the lobby, and his answer was, I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. Whereupon I said, this is not Spanish, this is English. He was so tired. And he didn't have a word of Spanish, and with my New York accent, he thought I must be speaking Spanish or some other language. So I said it this time very much more slowly, and he said, "Yeah, come on up." So I went up there, and there was no air conditioning in the hotel then, and it was very hot. And I knock on the door, and he answers the door in his underpants. So this is like meeting George Washington, and he's in his underpants. It was just the craziest thing, and the day went on from there. And we spent the whole day together. I took him to lunch at Botein's restaurant downtown, and we were sitting in the bodega, and there were some Americans down there, and they were whispering. They said, "That looks like Martin Luther King." I said, "No, that's not Martin Luther King." It's funny how I overheard their conversation. And it went on from there. I got to know him not as a historic figure who would win the Nobel Prize 2 weeks later, but as a person, and we talked about many things that were very important to me, and the funny thing is that he was so ahead of his time that I was behind him. I didn't necessarily then agree with everything he was saying. He was just so much more advanced. Well, I mean, already he was, he had ideas about Vietnam. He had ideas about multiculturalism. We didn't have that word yet, but I mean, everything he talked about later I would embrace, but at that point I wasn't ready for it. Yeah, my favorite cuisine in the world really is Spanish food. In fact, and my wife, both of us love it, and so we cook with a lot of garlic in our house. Of course, we have no friends anymore because the great thing about Spain is everybody eats garlic, so nobody notices anything about your breath. But in the States, if you eat garlic, you almost... I've thought of going into the business of manufacturing pins which says, "I eat garlic," so that you could announce to the world that this is why my breath is so strong. But yeah, I fell in love with Spanish food and the Spanish way of eating, of course, great Spanish wines. And as I talk about it in the book, I think the most overrated food and wine in the world is the French. And I think I think increasingly the world is seeing what I knew immediately when I came here. Boy, this is the best food in the world and the best wine, and this is a great culture. I mean, Spain was thought of as secondary then to the rest of Europe. Spain is in Africa or something like that. There was that kind of prejudice about Spain, which was crazy. But I think so. Well, first of all, in the days that I was here, there weren't that many American tourists coming here. They when they came to Europe, they went everywhere else. Not too many came to Spain. But over the years, I think people discovered this is a much more interesting and much more beautiful country than so much of the rest of Europe. And so Americans have been coming here more and more and more and more. One of the things that was very apparent when I was here, well, first of all, we did not have a Spanish American Studies Association, which my last couple of days in Madrid, I'll be speaking twice at in Alcalá de Henares, where the Spanish American Studies Association has its meeting every 2 years. And I may be the only American member. I'm a regular member. I pay dues, and so part of my job was to encourage the study of the United States. And in fact, this book is published by the University of Valencia, the Biblioteca Javier Coy. Javier is an old friend of mine, and I hope to see him when we're in Valencia. It's named for him because he was just about the first Spaniard who really began to write about American literature and culture, and his brother Juan Jose as well. And so, but there was no Spanish Association for American Studies. American Studies meant really Latin American Studies, is really what it meant. And so I would, in my job, I would try to, wherever I went, give talks on American culture and try to encourage people and try to get scholarships for Spaniards to, say, go to the U.S. and get a doctorate in American Studies, which Javier did. And then you began to have catedráticos or full professors or whatever of American Studies. I'm not saying I had that much to do with it, but I think the germ of the idea, I think, was partly my own, because my own PhD is in American Studies. So I was pushing that very, very much. And I think Americans know much more about Spain, and Spaniards know much more about the United States.